Imagine, July 1456. The Danube River, northern Serbia. 3 years since Constantinople fell. The city that anchored the eastern boundary of the Old World broke in 53 days. Now the same Sultan turns north. One fortress stands across his path, Belgrade. The point where the Danube and the Sava converge, the primary land corridor into Central Europe. If it falls, Hungary lies open. If Hungary falls, there is no second line. Almost none of Europe's kings are sending help. Mehmed II was 24 when he arrived at Belgrade. 3 years earlier, he had taken Constantinople. He brought 60 to 80,000 men. Among them, 25 to 30,000 Janissaries, the professional corps of the Ottoman army, trained from boyhood for nothing else. A unit that had not failed a siege since its formation. 300 cannon, a fleet of 200 vessels on the Danube to close the river. Mehmed had taken the greatest city in Christendom with less. Inside the walls, John Hunyadi had fewer than 7,000 soldiers. He was 62 years old. 3 decades fighting the Ottoman advance across the Balkans. He had beaten them at Nice in 1443. He had survived the catastrophic defeat at Varna in 1444, when his allies broke around him and he extracted what remained, himself. He had never faced a force of this scale. He organized the defense anyway. He was already inside the walls when the Ottoman army appeared on the horizon, alongside the garrison, between 20 and 30,000 additional fighters. The crusade force assembled by a 70-year-old Franciscan friar named Giovanni da Capistrano. The men who answered were not soldiers. Farmers, craftsmen, monks. Some carried weapons they had made themselves. They had no training, no armor, and no idea what sustained artillery bombardment felt like. Military commanders of the period used one word for them: rabble. 6 weeks later, they would revise it. The first decisive engagement was not on the walls. The Ottoman fleet had sealed the Danube, blocking resupply, blocking reinforcement. Without the river, the fortress could be starved out without a single direct assault. On July 14th, Hunyadi struck the Ottoman fleet at anchor. 3 ships captured, several sunk. The blockade broke. This engagement is absent from most popular accounts. Without it, the defense that followed would have been a very different calculation. The artillery bombardment opened on July 4th and ran for 17 days. Methodical. The guns concentrated on specific points to create controlled breaches. By the 3rd day, the river gate had fallen. A tower on the south wall was gone by the 9th. The garrison worked through every night while the guns cooled. Rubble, timber, packed earth. Work that held. The Ottoman engineers raced toward a date. The defenders raced to delay it. Hunyadi was everywhere during the bombardment, in the operational sense, refusing to delegate verification that every breach was filled and every section manned. Contemporary accounts describe him directing repairs under live fire. Capistrano moved through the same sections, speaking to the defenders while walls came down nearby. The Crusade volunteers were still present and fighting after 17 days of bombardment. By every calculation, they should not have been. The regulars knew what cannon could do. The volunteers did not. Which of those 2 positions was the advantage? The sources leave open. On the Ottoman side, the siege was proceeding exactly as planned. Mehmed was correct about the walls. What his intelligence had not conveyed was how fast the defenders rebuilt them. The final assault came in darkness. July 21st. The guns went quiet. The sudden silence after 17 days of constant fire was more unsettling than the noise had been. Then, the drums. 30,000 Janissaries advanced through the primary breaches. The fighting was immediate, close, and costly on both sides. For 3 hours, the assault pressed into the fortress. The Janissaries seized the river entrance. The garrison drove them back out. A section of the north wall broke. Hungarian knights held the gap. By mid-morning, Ottoman forces held roughly 30% of the interior. Mehmed sent word the fortress would fall by noon. Capistrano gathered the volunteers, every farmer and craftsman and monk still standing, and directed them toward the breach. Not to hold. Forward. What happened next does not have a clean military explanation. The Janissaries, pressing forward continuously for 3 hours, hesitated. That was enough. Hunyadi had held 500 cavalry in reserve throughout the entire assault, waiting for a moment that operational logic said would not come. He sent them through the damaged gates while Capistrano's volunteers pressed in from the other side. The two forces met in the Ottoman formations. The line broke. Mehmed entered the battle personally. He brought 3,000 of his guard to stabilize the line. An arrow found his thigh. The wound was not fatal, but the sight of the Sultan being carried from the field ended the battle faster than any cavalry charge. Within minutes, a retreat. Within the hour, a rout. Hunyadi ordered the force into the abandoned Ottoman camp. The powder magazines ignited. 300 cannon were left behind. The army that had darkened the horizon was gone. John Hunyadi died 11 days after the battle. August 11th, 1456. The plague did not spare him. Giovanni da Capistrano survived him by 3 months. He was canonized in 1690. Hunyadi was not, though his son Matthias became one of Hungary's greatest kings. Mehmed II reigned for another 25 years. He never returned to Belgrade. The title conqueror had been given him for Constantinople. Belgrade was the place where the name stopped expanding. Belgrade held for 65 years. When Suleiman the Magnificent took it in 1521, the strategic picture had changed enough that the consequences were different. What the defenders of 1456 bought was not a permanent barrier. It was time, years in which the window of maximum Ottoman advantage slowly closed. Years in which the rest of Europe had room to reorganize. Belgrade did not stop an empire forever. It stopped one at the moment it mattered most.